Okay, so let's hit the ground running. Good morning, everyone. I actually see there's a name on here, David. And when I saw David's name, I saw him a couple of days ago at the JCC AGM. And I told a little joke there, and maybe we'll start with that and then dive into it for our time. So they tell a story of one of the many tyrants that the Jewish people have faced. And he gets up there and he's reading all of the edicts against the Jewish people that are going to be enforced in that time, and one after the other sounds scarier than the one beforehand. And he collects everyone into the town square, and they're all hearing what's going to happen over the coming days and weeks. And everyone's breaking into tears and sobbing. And there's one Jewish guy in the back who's just dying of laughter. And it's just bothering this guy. Every time he says something else, the guy starts laughing and laughing. Finally goes up to the guy, he stops the whole thing. He says, "You Jew, come up here." Says, "I don't understand. Do you hear what I'm telling is going to happen to your people? Like, how is it possible that you're sitting and laughing? Like, what's going through your mind?" He says, "Listen, I'll be honest." He says, "We've heard things like this before from people like you. You know, thousands of years ago, there was a person by the name of Pharaoh, and he said the exact same things. And now we're still here, and we eat these square little wafers called matzahs to remember how he's no longer there, and we won." Uh, a bunch of years later on, there were other people. We're celebrating Chanukah, right? There were the Greeks, and the Greeks said they're going to destroy the Jewish people. Every last remnant of their spiritual reality is going to be destroyed as an individual. He says, and the truth is, it was scary, but we got over it. And then now we eat these fried donuts and latkes called sufganiot, right? Sufganiot and latkes we eat. He says a little later on, there was this really evil man, Haman, genocidal edict against the Jewish people, destroying them. Within a day, the entire people were supposed to be wiped off the face of the earth, and we weren't even allowed to defend ourselves. And miraculously, we defeated them also, and they are no longer. And we're here, and now we eat these little triangle cookies called hamantaschen. And as you're sitting there and telling us what you're going to do to the Jewish people, I keep thinking, when we win, what kind of food are we going to eat to remember who you were thousands of years later? So I think what we always try to do when we get together here is right, the Chizzuk is, we know Jewish history, and we know that Jewish history is not about our history, that there's always a future to it. And then our job is, to always have that hope, because it's not this senseless hope, it's our destiny. And then at the same time, pivot into, so what do we do about that? Right? What's our role in that place? So we're not passive observers of Jewish history. We're supposed to be active contributors to the unfolding future of the Jewish people. So we entitled this "The Secret to Shining Bright During Dark Times." And I'd like to, with the 11 or 12 minutes that we have left, point out a couple of obvious points that we sometimes skip over, as well as then go ahead and try to add a few other small details that might illuminate, pardon the pun, Chanukah and Shabbos. So number one is, right, the idea of shining brighter during dark times. We all know that the light shines brightest when it's dark. Meaning, right, we forget that the nature of the world is that a candle has its greatest power specifically in the dark times. So when it's light outside, you save your electricity. You don't turn on your lights in your home, especially if you have lots of windows. Why bother turning on a light? It's light. I don't need to add my light to that light. So sometimes we get this feeling of, oh, but it's so dark. And Hanukkah, as we know, is during the darkest period of the entire year. Nothing in Jewish life or holidays or timing is accidental. Hanukkah would be not as relevant in the daytime when it's bright until 9, 10 o'clock and you're fighting to get your kids into bed because they don't realize that it's past 7 o'clock their bedtime because it's still light outside. They don't realize what's going on. So when I turn the light on in light, it's almost irrelevant. Specifically, when we need to shine the brightest, and in nature, when it works the best, is when it is the darkest. So this shouldn't be a time where we feel like, oh, but it's so dark, what do we do? We say the opposite. This is when the Jewish light of who we are is meant to and can shine brightest than ever. And this is something intuitively that we see happening in the Jewish world right now. And it's built in, it's caked into the mechanics and the physics of the world. That's A. B, we have to understand that the brighter the light, the bigger the light, the more light it will shine. right? So part of our role is, how do I be that biggest light possible during this dark time? There's a very interesting machlokas. Machlokas means a disagreement. Jews are really good at that, right? There's two individuals who are always sitting there and having different opinions. In Talmudic literature, if I would say the word Beit Hillel, right, the house of Hillel, very often on the same line, you will see Beit Shammai, right? Hillel and Shammai, these two figures throughout Jewish history, were always sitting there and having a difference of opinions. And we believe, for another time, that both of the opinions are valid. It just depends which time period you're supposed to be using that opinion, right? Meaning I can sit there and say, it's good to do this. It's good to turn on the lights. Well, you're right. Well, if it's dark, it's good to turn on the lights. If it's light outside, it's a waste of electricity. It's not that the opinions are right or wrong. It's that what is the time in which we need which of those two opinions? So there's a famous machlokas disagreement between Hillel and Shammai in terms of how we light the menorah. Everybody knows that our menorah has 8 beautiful candles plus the little extra shamash. And we light, according to Beis Hillel, that says every day you light another candle, what's called Mosif V'holech. Every day you add, first you start 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not the only opinion we have in our tradition. Shammai's opinion says, no, you're poches V'holech. Start at 8. It's almost like a countdown. There's something natural about that, right? If you're waiting for the new oil to be prepared, you're counting down 8 days left, 7 days, 6 days, 5 days. And these were their two opinions. And Shammai did like Shammai. Shammai would light the menorah 8, not 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You think he's crazy. What are you doing? Right? That was his opinion. We hold of the opinion that you're Mosif V'holech. You add each night another candle. So one of the many explanations behind this disagreement is, in the time that we live right now, a person has to always be living in a state of, I'm increasing my light. Means our identity over time is not supposed to get weaker, it's supposed to get stronger. Our family connection to our heritage of where we're going as time goes on is not supposed to weaken over time. I shouldn't look back at, I see actually over my, what's this corner? My left-hand side. That's my grandfather over there, right? My grandfather studied in Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, right? A holy man who, when I walked into Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, felt honestly that I was sitting there as part of the history that he wanted to see happen in this world. I realized I'm not supposed to look back and say, oh, my grandfather was a really righteous, holy person. My grandfather's saying, hey, Rafi, like, what are you doing? Like, how bright is your light? So we're supposed to be Mosif V'holech as we go on, both individually as we get older. We're supposed to become brighter, stronger lights of who we are as Jews, as well as when we increase our lights and have our communities strengthen as time goes on. That's our goal, because if we do the opposite, if we count down, if our lights get dimmer, right, then the darkness wins. And I think that that's an important point to keep in mind. Now, you might ask, I'll just say on the side, right, Beis Shammai's opinion of you can go down to one light, because the truth is, if your one light is powerful enough, right, it can illuminate the world. Now, how do we know that? Well, simple, right? Abraham, there's a beautiful idea. Abraham's told, go out and look at the sky. And if you can count what's in the stars in the sky, you will go ahead and understand what your people are like. And the simple understanding of that is, look up and there are millions of stars, ones that we can't even see. Right? And it's unbelievable how many lights there are in the darkness and in a clear place. When you're outside of the city, outside of Toronto, and you're in the middle of nowhere where there's no electricity, you see that it can illuminate between that and the moon everything that you need to see. But it takes a tremendous amount of different light sources for that to happen. But it's very interesting. If you look a little bit later in that parsha, when God says, come outside, look up and count what you see, after he says, look up, count what you see, a few sentences later, it says the following words. It says, oh, and the sun set. Well, that's weird, because by saying, and the sun set, what that means is, up until now, the sun was out. So the deeper commentaries say, what does that mean? It means if you look up at the sky and you really see what your people are like, you'll see the sun. What does that mean? The sun means if you're a bright enough light, you don't need to add light. You're the source of all light in the world. if you're your own, if you sit there and say, wait, we don't need a bunch of disparate little lights, right? And this ties into, but it's too long for us to go into, the idea of achdus, of coming together, means just like we start Shabbos candles with separate candles, right? But by Havdalah, we bring them together so it's a bonfire. We take all these disparate lights and say they're not separate lights. If we can find a way to pull them in, a light is more powerful when its concentrated energy is inside. And then what it shoots outside is stronger. As opposed to if I put a little light here, a little light there, a little light there, it lights the way step by step. But if you're able to consolidate the power, the energy, in terms of what that light is, the ability for that to shine gets rid of all need to see other little lights that are out there. And it's interesting, if you think about it, you see this message. Rav Soloveitchik once gave a beautiful insight. Rav Soloveitchik was the rabbi really where I got my smicha. He passed away before I got there, but the head of YU and a modern Orthodox sort of role model figure in the 20th century. He explains if you look at all the Masechtos, the different tractates in Jewish Talmud, which talk about the holidays, you have a tractate, for example, called Pesachim. Pesachim deals with Pesach, right? So you have a tractate about Pesach. You have another tractate, another volume, another book, one of these books over here, right over here, these red ones, right over here, right? He says, if you look at Megillah, there's a tractate, there's a book called Megillah, and that's about Purim, when we read the Megillah. There's a tractate called Rosh Hashanah, and you can probably guess what that deals with, Rosh Hashanah. He says, you will not find a tractate, you won't find a book called Chanukah or Menorah. It only happens to be dealt with in the middle of another tractate, another book called Shabbos. Right? There's a huge volume about Shabbos, and then there's a little bit in the center of there, a few pages that talk about Chanukah. He says, why is that? Yes, they both have candles. We understand. You light your Shabbos candles and your Havdalah candles, but why is it inside there? So the principle is always, if you have a choice, let's say I only have one candle in my house, and I have to light a candle, and it's Chanukah and Shabbos. Which one takes priority? So we'd say, wait, Chanukah is a miracle. Chanukah is Persumei Nisa. We sit there and tell about the tremendous miracles that happen. It says, no. If you have one candle, you got to light Shabbos candles. Shabbos candles comes first. So Rav Soloveitchik explains, why is that the case? He says, because the truth is, the ability for your Chanukah candle to shine bright, as we know by the window out into the world, is dependent on how much the light shines within your own home and life. Meaning, if you're just out there putting out light, but you're not actually sitting there and re-energizing and building up your own personal light before you go out, it's not going to work. And therefore, if a person doesn't fortify their own light before they shine out, then eventually even the light outside will be subsumed by darkness as well. And therefore, it's inside Shabbos to say, wait, a person's got to understand that really first they light their own light. Right? It's almost like the analogy of when a person is sitting there on an airplane. Please God, it never should happen. But if there's if the oxygen level goes down and there's a fear and the masks come down, it says always, it's counterintuitive. You'd say, I'm traveling. I can't travel with all 8 of my kids. I can't afford to do that anywhere. It'd be another mortgage. But if I'm traveling with 8 kids, my thought would be, quick, I got to get their masks on, right? But the principle is, put your mask on first, Rafi. Wasn't that selfish? I want to save the world. It says, wait. If you're not in a good space, you will be useless to being able to help others as well. And therefore, the candle that we light first is our inner candle, our inner light. And if we have that, then it says after that, okay, then you can go out with Chanukah as well. And I think that those messages, both in terms of realizing when it's dark, we're not supposed to say this is horrible. It is horrible. We're not supposed to say this is the end. We're supposed to say, wait, this is when we're supposed to shine as bright as possible. When we sit there and say, wait, how do I shine bright? It means I'm constantly supposed to be infusing more into my brightness, mosif v'holich, more and more, to the point where I realize if I were to sit there and be as strong of a light as possible, all other little lights aren't even necessary when we come together and we're that strong. And the other small point that we'll end off with is the realization that this is what Chanukah is all about. So when you open up your siddur and you look at the prayer Al Hanisim, whether we say it during Shmona Esrei, whether we say the Amida, whether we say it during benching, or just if you look at the tefillah, if you've never seen it before, right? The tefillah says it's Rabim Biad Ma'atim. Jewish history is there's a lot of people against us, but somehow the small people win. There's the Rishayim B'Ziad Tzadikim, the people that are evil and willing to do any immoral actions and go to any cause to do what's wrong. And we know that there's a lot more evil that can be done. And that's a lot more powerful. And there's a lot more options than the good that's there. But if you stick with your values and good, that'll win also. It says the Tameim Biataharim, people who are impure in their thoughts and their actions and their deeds, what we're seeing around us, the way people think, seems like impossible. Don't worry, Biataharim. If you stay the high road, that will win. The entire story of Chanukah is the reminder that we've seen these matzahs, we've seen these sufganiyot, we've seen these hamantashen before, and we'll see whatever it is now that's going to happen as a result of this as well. And our role during that time is to realize that we've got to go ahead and shine and light as many candles as we can, both internally as strong as possible, as well as externally as well. I think that's our 15 minutes. So if there's any questions, we can stop the recording. But wishing everyone a Chanukah Sameach, a Shabbat Shalom, and maybe eat that cookie very soon. Maybe eat that cookie very soon.